But I'm glad to see everybody. And in this class, our second class, forms of meditation, remember, we're talking about these forms of meditation in terms of relationship and relating, and we're still in the section that is relating to self. So that's what we'll focus on. We'll continue. We started with breathing and the body scans last week. And as we begin to talk about meditation using perception, we need to talk about the role of language in perceiving. So the clearest work I've read on this subject is Dale Wright in his book, Philosophical Meditations on Zen Buddhism. We read this book in depth and practice quite a while ago. And this is a little bit of a long quote and a little bit academic, so please bear with me because I found it so surprising and I think it's really important. So he says, even before we get around to describing experience, language is already there as the form or forms that the experience has taken. Language is already embedded in the content of our experience. So this understanding of language does not make a distinction between primary experience and a subsequent interpretation that we piece together and then place upon the raw data of experience. So it's a different model altogether. Language and perception co-arise. Although theoretically separable, they are indistinguishable in experience itself. How so? We always understand what we perceive immediately as whatever it appears to be. Awareness of what it is that we perceive is linguistically structured and comes to us directly in the perception itself. We perceive this directly as what it is, a book, a sound, a strange situation. These linguistically constituted images arise in the perception itself rather than subsequently. We can test this in our own experience. Try to find a perception that is not already associated with some language in the initial encounter. It is true that we do perceive some things incorrectly, and that subsequently we alter the language through which that perception is understood. But both perceptions, both correct and incorrect, come to us in the form of language. Language doesn't guarantee accuracy. It just guarantees that all our perceptions will be understood within the given context of language. It's also true that we sometimes perceive some things in uncertainty, in sheer perplexity. We don't know how to understand them initially, even though we have definitely perceived them. Yet, language is already there, setting even this perception in context. We have perceived this state of affairs as perplexing, as uncertain, as mysterious, even if that is all we initially perceive in it. Language, in its entirety of involvement in thought and practice, functions to set up a context of significance in which perception occurs. By means of language, the world, the given, is focused and organized in advance of every encounter with entities, persons, or situations. Assigning it a linguistic form is not something we do after seeing it. It is the very shape the seeing has already taken. Although this language refers to something extra-linguistic, something beyond language, that something appears to us as the reality that it is through language. Language, therefore, is not to be located only at the level of concept and predication. It is also present at the level of perception in such a way that perception, language, and thinking are all interdependent. So this was startling to me because I always assume that there's a given world you perceive and then you wrap language around it to understand it. So the idea that it's already bound up in language, even in the act of perceiving, I found quite startling. So Let's talk about meditation with perception as a way of self-knowing and in relation to others. There's no such thing as naked perception, as Dale Wright points out. Instead, what we observe is how rapidly our perceptions arise and are named, labeled, and incorporated into our ongoing narration of self. Most of the time, this is occurring without our even being aware of it. Meditation with perception opens our awareness and makes this process visible, at least some of the time. The meditation focus, candle, flower, stone, shell, mandala, sounds, and so on, provides a kind of home base we return to over and over again when we notice we have lost that focus, are drifting in our stories. There's no judgment associated with this process, simply a willingness to return, maybe thousands of times in a single sitting period, until gradually our mind begins to rest in the present moment experience without too much agitation, dullness, or clinging, without any notion of I or me doing it. There's just hearing, seeing, feeling. This means our situation is relational. We are enmeshed with the whole world. Can you separate the sound from the hearing or the hearer? Only through language is this possible. Is the sound inside or outside or somehow in between? In traditional Buddhist teachings, hearing has these aspects: a sense organ, the ear and its associated nerves, brain centers, etc., an external stimulus, a sound, and a sense consciousness, the faculty of hearing, which is a product of the contact between the first two. Each sense has a particular sense organ, external form it contacts, and specific sense consciousness. The mind is considered a sense organ also, making its own contact with the world and with its own sense consciousness of thoughts, emotions, ideas, plans, theories, explanations, expectations, and so on. The advantages of using a sensory concentration in meditation is that it can only be experienced in present moment. And when you drift off in thoughts or stories, it is a concrete, specific place to return to. It cannot be controlled or manipulated. Further, our senses are an intimate encounter, the interface between ourselves and our world. They reveal our relationship both internally and externally to what is. So we'll have a little bit of an activity, and this is a two-part activity. In the first part, I'll kind of do a little bit of guiding. In the second part, you'll do with a partner. So this is a practice with mindfulness of hearing. You want to sit upright and become mindful. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes, and for the next few minutes, attend solely to your sense of hearing and the sounds that arise in it, including this voice. Begin with the sounds of your own body, your breathing, your heartbeat, whatever you can discern. Then allow your awareness to expand to sounds in the room, in the house, my voice, a refrigerator or washing machine running, a dog sighing in sleep. Maybe it's very quiet in your space. Allow your awareness to expand further to the sounds in the space outdoors, a yard, a parking lot, a neighborhood, a lawnmower down the street, two neighbors talking in front, kids on bicycles laughing. Again, it may be very quiet. And then your awareness expands much further, as far as you can hear sounds. An airplane will be nearly 5 miles above you. On a nearby highway, traffic, the burble of a stream. Maybe you hear a siren in the distance. How far beyond your body do you think you can hear? Just rest in that spaciousness. Now return your awareness of sound to this room, my voice, your breathing. What did you observe in this little practice of concentration on hearing? We can discuss that a little bit and see what you discovered. And if you would like to share something, please raise your hand. I think most people know how to do that from the reactions button at the bottom of the screen. Coming back to space you're in, the body you're in. Joel, you want to unmute yourself? I think you can, right?
Hi, thank you. I wonder about Dale Wright's characterization. It seems like he's focusing on so there's two aspects to hearing, which I'm constantly aware of because I have tinnitus, which is that I have a noise in my head, and I have to tease out signal from that noise. And this is, key to information processing, that it's a big scientific discipline. It's like there's noise all around, and then you figure out what's the signal. And that what it seems to me that Dale Wright is focusing on is the moment when in perception, noise becomes signal, and you perceive something, and you give it a name at that moment, or it has a shape that you recognize that is that you can draw upon your stored memories, and I find myself in meditation trying to connect with my senses in that plane, or that thin membrane between the perception, and mostly in feeling and temperature and pressure and that kind of stuff, before it turns where it's just noise. It's just the stuff that's going on, and before it flips over into something that I have a name for. And
Dale Wright is completely refuting that model.
Yeah, I know, but it is my experience that it exists. So
well, that's notice that you started with naming tinnitus.
Again, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. And Oh, by the way, in the Tibetan tradition, that's viewed as hearing the music of the spheres, the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
So it has a positive aspect. But in any event, we really believe this. This is what I found so surprising. But already, language is directing our perception.
Well,
and that's so
okay.
challenging about what he's writing about. I thought about this for a long time because I was thinking, how's that possible? How's that possible? And I had, like language is literally the medium we're swimming in. It's what's coming into our gills,
I, I, I think that there is a substrate, really. In my experience, it seems to me like there's a substrate before language kicks in that is, that's sensory perception. Anyway, that's,
Yeah, and the only way,
it's a very strong experience for me,
yeah,
again, I can't tell you about the noise in my head. I mean, what was striking to me as you were guiding our meditation so beautifully was you could not say, "Do you hear the noise made by the grass blades growing and brushing against each other?" That there's a constant level of noise that is below the level of our perception
our
and our
sense organs.
naming,
Yeah, our sense
right?
organs.
But that are present to our sense organs.
No, they're not. I mean, the sound of the blades of grass rubbing against each other, not present to our sense organs. We can't pick that up normally because our ears are not sensitive enough. So,
Well, and
although you can in Iowa, you can hear the corn growing if you stand in the middle of a cornfield in July. You can hear it, but our sense organs have a narrow band of vibration that they can receive.
right.
And our understanding in Buddhism is you have this sense organ, you have the stimulus outside somewhere, there's a contact, and out of that arises sense consciousness. That's completely linguistically entangled. So the sense organ isn't a linguistic construct. The outside stimulus isn't a linguistic construct, but the meeting is a linguistic construct. So that's all Dale Wright's saying. These things arise together, and we can separate them but we can only use language to do that, right? To separate. Yeah. And so that.
Can I ask, are there like MRI studies that could be useful in untangling this any further? I mean, it seems to me he's just making an assertion.
Yeah, and I think that it's because he's a philosopher, so that's what philosophers do. But it struck me how much of the time we think we're just receiving in an unfiltered way sense perceptions, which are already conditioned by language, already shaped by language. Even the sense of what's important to look at, even the sense of what can be separated out from the background.
Right.
Foreground to background.
Right.
Even those are all linguistically constructed. A man, a leaf, a flower, a plant, and they carry different meanings and associations that are for us linguistic constructs, right?
Which we turn into whole cultures and stuff, yeah.
Right. So sometimes we think of poetry as presenting unmediated experience, but it's still wrapped in language, right? And language has even informed what the poet pays attention to and how they put things together.
Well, Peg, I'm sorry, I'll let this go, and I'm sorry that I'm taking so much time on this.
That's okay.
But let me say, for me, part of this investigation is the beauty of the 10,000 things coming forward.
Yes, that's right.
That is that the unfolding of the universe is happening, and it seems to me available to me just this in this minuscule membrane before the words kick in.
Oh, okay.
And for me, that seems important to be able to recognize and investigate further.
The problem is you can't get there. You can't get on the other side of that membrane.
Okay, I'll drop it for now.
Okay, all right. So Jason.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was so powerful to go through that exercise. I've been in my head. I'm taking this speed reading course, and I'm reading a lot, like last night and this morning, and and then I remembered, oh, I have the class this morning, and I sat down, and hearing you talk through that, and just slowly noticing the sounds was so powerful for me. It was wonderful, and yeah, I don't have a comment on about language at all. I just want to say it was really powerful.
Yeah.
But hey, like you say, we all walk around with supercomputers for a brain. So yeah, I don't know. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it is very powerful to get re-embodied in a way, and to start with what's most immediate, and then allow the awareness to expand out from there. As for me, has been very helpful in meditation practice. Yeah. Janelle, thanks so much for helping us get connected here.
No worries. No, may I share a little quote of someone that about our perception of the world? May I share with you guys?
Sure.
All right. Imagine an eye unruled by man-made laws of perspective, an eye unprejudiced by compositional logic, an eye which does not respond to the name of everything, but which must know each object encountered in life through an adventure of perception. How many colors are there in a field of grass to the crawling baby unaware of the color green? How many rainbows can light create for the untutored eye? How aware of variations in heat waves can that eye be? Imagine a world alive with incomprehensible objects and shimmering with an endless variety of movement and innumerable gradations of color. Imagine a world before the beginning was the word. And I always, to me, I honestly, I hold that to myself when I have disagreements with people, because like, even when the argument is the dress blue or blue and white, or, you know, gold and whatever, and you realize we see the world differently. We really genuinely see the world differently, and we experience it based on the language that we are given, you know, like honestly, people who live in Alaska see snow differently than we do, because it's not a life and death situation for us. So they, you know, they have multiple words to describe snow, and we just say snow, sleet, you know what I mean? Like, really, I do agree that language constructs the world that we live in.
Yeah.
And babies are the truest form, you know, experience the world in its truest form, because they don't know yet no language. Right.
That's right. But they're about to be told what things are, right? That was the experience my sister had when she was doing cross-cultural studies of mothers. And when I said, you know, you're studying Japanese mothers and American mothers, what's the difference? Because I've told this story before. The American mothers take their babies out and they say, that's a car, that's a man, that's a tree, that's a street. And the Japanese mothers take their babies out, they unwrap them and they say, feel, smell. It's a different way to start, right? So from the very beginning, babies are acculturated differently and oriented differently in terms of what their experience is, and it's languaged for them differently. So I found that very fascinating, you know, and I thought, well, what happens then, you know, if you grow up in that way, being invited to experience or being invited to objectify, label, name, it's got to have quite a different impact on your consciousness. So, all right, are you ready for part 2? Okay. Part 2 of this exercise. So I think, Maria, you're running the show here, right? Okay, so here's what part 2. I'm going to tell you the whole thing about part 2, and I'm going to let you sort of time yourselves, because it's a short activity. So you're with a partner. So we're going to have breakout rooms in pairs, not including me. But let me explain this first. You're with a partner. Your partner is going to speak on any topic, it doesn't matter, for 1 minute. If you're the listener, you simply attend to the pace, the tone of voice, the inflections, the pauses, the music of speaking, without getting caught up in the content. That's all you're going to do. Just listening for the sound of the voice. This is another hearing activity, right? Then you're going to switch partners, and the listener becomes the new speaker for 1 minute. You have to time yourselves for this. And then the speakers and the listeners have changed. It's the same thing. The listener attends to the pace, the tone of voice, inflections, pauses, the music of speaking, without getting caught up in the content. You may pick up an emotion tone. You might in the speaking, for example. And then when you have completed that, talk together for a few minutes about what you noticed. What was your experience as the speaker? What was your experience as the listener? What did you notice and observe about that experience? So that's the whole activity. And then we'll come back together and share a little bit of what you discover. Does that make sense? Okay, Maria, can you set us up?
I can. I've put you in a room on your own, Peg. So if you just join it, you'll.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Okay.
How long shall I do it for?
I think we probably we have the 2 minutes, each person speaking for 1 minute, a little bit of getting settled to start with. So, and then a little bit of discussion after. So I'd say maybe about maybe 10 minutes total.
Okay. There we go. And here we go. Hold on to your hats.
So as I was saying, before I muted myself, what did you discover, if anything? I'm pretty sure you discovered something, right? In this little activity. So what did you discover? Either as the speaker or as the listener. Yeah, Fabian.
I think when I did that activity with my partner, I found it hard just to stay focused on the hearing. I think his expression and his eyes were so expressive. It's like all the senses were like caught up in that activity. That's what I discovered.
Yeah, we see how attuned we are to facial expressions in the people we're talking with. We get sort of a sense of, what's happening through that visual sense.
And then I realized also he started talking and he said the word learning. And being a foreign language teacher, being the teacher, I heard the word learning. It's like all my attention was fully captivated. And I thought that was like surprising, just how one word can like resonate deeper to you.
Yeah.
That was my experience. But thank you for letting us experience all this. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a kind of, it's a form of play, I always think. Right? Yeah. Okay, Roger.
Yeah, when I was listening, I actually closed my eyes, but I found it extremely difficult to try to ignore the content of what was being said. And I did have several moments where I could kind of tune that out and just focus on the sound itself and, the rise and fall of the voice I was listening to. And so that was quite interesting, to know that I am so bound up in language. It's hard for me to ignore it when it's, the content of it, when it's coming from my ears. So And when I was speaking, I don't like to talk that much, so it was a bit of an effort to fill up a minute with whatever came to mind. So anyway, I enjoyed the exercise. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it points to really the great complexity in human communication, the ways that we have learned to bring together so many perceptions. This is why online communication can be difficult, because some of the complexity that we expect in interpersonal relationships drops out of whatever medium we're in, right? So, yeah. So Jay.
Yeah, my partner was Anne, and one of the things we discussed is that I could not disconnect from the content of her a minute talk. I really couldn't, because one, I found it interesting, and I connected with it. And we also expressed that if she spoke a different language, a language that I did not know, then it would be easier to disconnect, because I didn't understand the language. So then I would just focus on the rhythm of her speech and canter. So yeah.
Our commitment to language as a way of communicating, it's so powerful. Yeah. Jason.
No, I didn't tell Fabienne this, but we had a really good conversation. But as soon as I heard her accent, I asked if she was from a country, and she told me where she was from. But I got excited, and I didn't tell her this because in my travels and skiing in Europe, I immediately just wanted to connect with her. And I felt at home, like I wanted to go into that story.
Yeah, it's funny how evocative it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have an embodied reaction to that connection. We're hardwired to connect with each other. So we have an embodied reaction. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Joan?
Well, as Jay said, if it had been in a foreign language, it would be easier. And I was with Claudine, and she started out in French, and then she went, oh boy, and then she went to English. And I had the same thing Fabienne said was, she said a couple of words that really got my attention, and I was having a hard time. But one of the things I noticed was a slowness and pausing, and that really made me feel like she was considering what she was saying, and then a faster pace, and then again that. And it was interesting, the meaning I got from just her pace. And
just the pace, right?
And like when she'd have an exclamation and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's it's an amazing amount of data from a very tiny experience, right? That's what I love about these little practices, right? Helen.
Yeah, well, a lot that everybody said I experienced also, but one thing I noticed was I could not detach from the emotional content. I mean, I heard that. I heard the emotional content. And the other thing that I think what Jay said made me think about is there's a old lady who lives next door about my age, and she speaks only Spanish and I speak only English, and we run into each other sometimes, and we like each other. And she knows about as much English as I know Spanish, which is not very much. We both know a few nouns. And we actually have whole conversations. And so I guess that's sort of like the experience of this exercise. I get the emotional content. Eventually I get the a little bit of the direction of what we're talking about, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. Joel.
I had that was a lovely experience for me, and I was in a breakout room with Mariam, and I wanted to connect with her right away, and I noticed that she was wearing a Band-Aid on her arm. I got a flu shot a few days ago, and I just took my Band-Aid off earlier today, and I asked her about that, and indeed she had gotten a flu shot too. I noticed that she spoke first. I was trying to focus on the flow and the quality, and a lot came through. Just a kind of what she said flowed easily. She had this kind of lilting quality in it, and I found myself looking up just to get visual confirmation, just to see if she were smiling while she talked, or how she was presenting that, because I think we do require, I think because humans can lie to each other, we need to get other cues as well. And then I said this to Mariam toward the end, that I thought this was one of your special trick exercises about relationality, that for me, I felt a great deal of warmth toward her that came out of attending to the quality of the quality of her voice and the flow of language and everything. So.
Yeah. Claudine?
I was with Joan, and it was very interesting because usually I pay attention to content or to feelings of the person, but then it was really a deeper experience where I was aware that she was in her head and reading the story in her head. I mean, she was discovering the story and then dreaming a second, and then going on. And I could see the depth of the other person more than I can see it usually in a normal relationship. And that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah, that is so interesting. We do tend to fasten on the content and not necessarily on what is this conversation revealing about our coming closer or farther apart, right? Like the relationality, the mutuality in the relationship. Then Maria.
Sorry, on a go slow there. Yeah, I loved it. I loved the exercise. It's kind of I really noticed that with the two different people that were in my group, and I noticed that they had different patterns to their talking, different rhythms, and the way they kind of, it was like a different tune, and how long they paused in between each thing they said, and it was lovely to just be able to kind of really feel like go past the language and just feel like in one I kind of felt, and one of the people I felt a kind of an anxiousness, a nervousness that made me feel really close and endeared to the person. I could really feel it strongly. And in the other person I could feel a sense of excitement and a kind of a faster kind of beat, if you like, to what they were saying, and to kind of really relate to that excitement and that faster beat, and in the other person the kind of sensitivity and a kind of a feeling like a real kind of care coming from me. And so it was really kind of lovely, really, just to feel that bit closer to those people, to go beyond what they were saying and just to really notice the patterns and the feelings and the what was being conveyed that isn't language, that's beyond that.
It's hard for us to allow ourselves that experience, I think. because we're so bound up in content and we're so bound up in the reflection of ourselves we're getting from the other person. It's such a hardwired thing, really. Yeah.
And always ready to kind of like a responsibility to have to respond. So kind of paying real attention to the content when sometimes the content is only 10% of everything that the person's conveying.
That's right. That's right. What they're really conveying is the process of relating. And so sometimes we can allow ourselves to focus on what is this process of relating? And are we able to find some freedom in that process? And that's a big challenge in our practice. Yeah, so good. Yeah. And sometimes relieving ourselves of the necessity of responding is what gives us that freedom, a little bit of freedom. So Mehdi, we'll come back to you, Joel, in a minute. You're muted, Mehdi.
Oh, okay.
You're muted now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it was a beautiful experience with Richie. He was in Scotland in his room, and I was seeing his paintings in the background. And that was very interesting. I didn't know him, and then we exchanged. I showed him some of my favorite, Hopper's paintings and all that. So we talked about, perception, sensations, and there was a seagull outside that I could hear the voice, and he was in his room, but seagulls I could hear, and it reminded me of my prior experience. Anyway, the perception was nice, the emotion was beautiful. Then I was really interested into what is the mind, the concept of mind within this context. And I think there are some levels of organization perhaps in our perceptions and understanding, and then meaning and values. They were all just mixing together, and I was just enjoying it. But the freedom that you are speaking, I have been studying and practicing, and it's just like a humorous interaction between self and other, and it can take so many shapes, and that impermanence, and I mean they all I have been experiencing it recently, and this is a fascinating experience, and I can relate to the beauty of whatever is, and or is not, perhaps at the same time. It's just a fascinating process, and I'm just saying that it is happening. It's like a daily type, and if I have my mind, perhaps again I'm using the mind, and it has been very helpful, and I just want some. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because sometimes when we do breath meditation, or contemplation of the breath or breathing, we end up in a kind of a struggle. And so the meditation on hearing, for example, you can't control your hearing. What comes in, comes in. So I was thinking about in relational terms, hearing when you're with another is quite different from listening. So when we listen with only half our attention, perhaps with the other half thinking about our response, planning dinner or looking at our phone, we're barely hearing anything. And I think there's so much redundancy in human communication because of that, because of the what I would call inefficiency of our listening. So in relational practice, we allow ourselves to rest in simply hearing the other or others without any other intention or distraction. So you might very well be attending to the content, or you might be attending to the tone of voice, or you might be attending to the speed or pace the way the person's speaking, but the experience of being heard in this way is profoundly nourishing. And it's profoundly nourishing to hear another in this way. So you can do little experiments in mindfulness of hearing when you're in a conversation, as well as when you're sitting in meditation, and see what you can discover when you're really hearing the other and not, occupying your mind with anything else. So a big part of our practice always is paying attention to what you're paying attention to, right? So there are plenty of other activities that are possible, and I'm not going to engage you in them because we will run out of time. But you can do this with a partner. You can look at the partner's face as if you are a painter, and you're only looking at colors and shadows and the shapes that they reveal, as a painter would do. And this, again, drops a lot of the content out and allows us to just be with the other person and without expectations or without any ideas. Another sort of favorite practice is some kind of object contemplation. It could be a candle flame, a flower, a stick of incense, a pebble, a leaf, a shell. And one form of this kind of object contemplation is to draw a simple object very, very slowly. So you're tracing its contours very precisely, very, very slowly. It should take at least 20 minutes if you're going slowly enough. So the purpose isn't to draw an artistic likeness of the object, but simply to engage in this activity of perception, looking closely at the surface. Our eyes are pretty quick to scan things, and the mind is pretty quick to name them. So this exercise slows our perception down and steps beyond language and embodied practice. You're just like in this flow of this minute drawing of a shell, a flower, that takes you down into a very meditative, simple space. And then there's so much of our cognition comes out of our visual sphere. Our visual sense is huge. And some experts estimate as much as 80% of what we perceive. And so there's always the potential for some kind of visual contemplation, but a particular Buddhist form of visual contemplation is the mandala. Mandalas are complex images that are rich with meanings, and they're intended as objects for meditation and reflection. They're generally kind of stupefying at first. They're filled with layers, geometric forms, ornate patterns, baffling figures, animals, people, supernatural beings, and writhing with activity. So our minds at first try to make sense of it logically, but we cannot. Mandalas are maps of whole universes, internal and external. So I'll give you an example. I'll share a visual image with you. This is the Chakra mandala. It's very, very famous in Tibetan Buddhism. And you can see there are many different layers from the middle radiating out, and there are all kinds of figures. And this is very symbolic. This is a very symbolic mandala. So I put up in the handouts on the class page this image, plus there's also a kind of description of what it contains or what its meanings are. But I also put up instructions for making your own mandala if you'd like to make one for yourself as a kind of visual practice. As they draw us in, we can only really allow the images to wash over us. Like koans, they resist our interpretations and explanations, and they insist on being met directly. We name and label a pig, a man, a circle, a level, until we wear waves. We wear out grasping for meaning. Even the many explanations of the design of a mandala cannot ultimately satisfy us. How does it help to know that this circle represents the 12-fold chain of dependent origination? But these were teaching vehicles and ways also of preserving the Buddha's teachings in the same way that the sutras were. So while these complex images are the opposite of the simplicity of a candle flame, a flower, or a stone, we soon discover the same exhaustion of our cognitive energies in the practice of simply attending. Mandalas are not the work of solitary artists, but the product of collective imagination and usually production. Monks working on a sand mandala gather around the perimeter, maneuvering their tiny funnels filled with colored sands to create the fine lines, precise patterns, and images together. I witnessed this when I was in San Diego, and I was just staggered by the incredible detail in these sand mandalas and the labor of the monks. And while I was there, you could get right up to it and you could look right at it while they were working on it, and they were so joyful. But while I was there, a woman came to view it, and as she turned, her handbag brushed about a third of it off onto the ground. And the monks laughed. They had spent literally weeks and weeks and weeks up to that point. So in any event, as we engage with the mandala, we're drawn into this extraordinary visualization of the Buddha and the long lineage of teachings and teachers. The collective imagination of the Sangha unfolding over thousands of years, and the embodied immediacy of our presence with it. So ultimately, we're compelled to surrender our conceptions and logical reasoning to simply rest and wonder. So I put these handouts up for you, and you can download them, you can print them if you want to, and explore them. I hope you'll explore this concentration practice of sensory perception more generally, which can be grounding, very grounding when we're scattered or agitated. It returns our awareness to our embodied presence and provides the experience of finding our home in the world. Having a focus for meditation is helpful, especially when beginning a meditation practice, whether in the early months or years of practice, the first few minutes of zazen, or the first period of an intensive. It's also helpful when we're suffering from pain or distress. Awareness of our sensory experience is awareness of our aliveness in the world. It's a complement to our open awareness practice, which we will be discussing toward the end of the course. Most of all, it can be helpful in our relationships with others, keeping us in the present moment of relating by anchoring our awareness in our senses. So what are we actually seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, thinking? In this way, we can be fully present for ourselves and for others. So think about that. If you're probably going to go have lunch after this, or some meal or another after this, and you can think about bringing that awareness of sensory perception, the visual field, aromas, tastes, noticing, all of these things, the shape you cut something, and the expansion of the negative space as you continue to eat a meal. I think this is a very good contemplation because it's quite concrete again, it's quite embodied, brings you into present moment experience. And how often we eat distracted, on the run, thinking about something else, watching television, reading a book, talking to somebody, and not really experiencing all of the sensory detail that's available to us. And it's the same in our relationships with other people and also our relationship with ourselves. So the more we're grounded, the more we can really feel at ease in any situation, even those situations which are most fraught. If we're returning to sensory experience, the sensation of our feet on the floor, the air temperature in the room, the tactile senses, these can all be very orienting when we're engaged with other people. And we can also include them in that, those perceptions. Of course, as everybody pointed out, it's only natural to notice the visual field when you're with someone, right? The facial expressions, do they look away? Do they seem bored? And it has a huge impact on our sense of being heard, of being felt, of being understood. So these are all things that we can not only use in our meditation practice, but also in our everyday lives as we are, whatever, washing the dishes or petting a dog or taking a little walk, driving in traffic. The more we can be grounded in these, in the sense fields, the more present we are. Okay, Jay?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how many people actually feel comfortable having someone stare you in the eye while you're talking? Most people feel very uncomfortable with that. I've tried. They're like, wait, why are you looking at me like that?
Yeah.
Most of us very uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, so that again is very cultured. So different cultures have different meanings associated with that. And also I found it's also gendered. So we have a little activity I used to do with my students in classes where, in pairs, where you sit facing each other and you close your eyes and you're going to just open them periodically and take a snapshot and close them again, just a snapshot of the person. And the other person's going to be doing the same thing. So sometimes when you look at them, their eyes are open. Sometimes when you look at them, their eyes are closed. So I found it was a very different experience if it was two women, or if it was two men, or if it was a man and a woman. If it was two men, they almost invariably ended up laughing. And what one of the students explained to me was, when a guy looks at another guy, that's either a threat or some kind of a come on. And that totally hadn't occurred to me, of course, it was not my experience. But it's interesting how those meanings, students had all kinds of meanings that were associated with just the act of opening their eyes, looking at another person, closing their eyes. A huge amount of data, just huge. I thought she was judging me, just an incredible amount of data that people were getting from these tiny, tiny little snapshots. So it's a very interesting practice. The other one that we had students do was sitting facing each other, and they're almost not touching, but knee to knee, like close together. And one of them is going to be an observer and a controller, and one of them is going to be a mover. So the controller, whenever they open their eyes, the person that's the mover moves slightly closer to them, just leaning slightly closer. When they close their eyes, the person stops. Open your eyes, the person continues moving until they get to a certain point, and the person will put up their hand, and that puts them into reverse. So when they open their eyes, they start moving away. They start moving away. And it's very, very interesting how people viewed those roles just from that perception of someone coming closer, someone moving away. Like some students would be thinking, don't go away, and others, there were students who thought that by moving forward, they were invading the other person's space, and the other person was actually welcoming that. So it was very interesting just from that simple exercise, how people got so much information from just that perception. Someone coming closer, someone moving farther away. So some of those little activities are fun to experiment with, because different people have completely different responses. I'd have people say, when I do right use of power training, they'd say, well, I've done this exercise before, so maybe I shouldn't do it. I'd say, do it again. Every single time it's different. Yeah, with every single partner, it's different. Yeah. So I like these little embodied exercises because there's such an important teaching that isn't really didactic. It's just you discover it in your felt sense, in your body. It's not an intellectual understanding, as many of you experienced, with even just the hearing exercise. So yeah, so we're almost at the end of our time. We are at the end of our time. Are there any last minute questions? Hopefully next week I can actually get connected more rapidly. I can figure out what's going on, but we'll have to think about that. No last minute questions? All right. So enjoy your week, and we'll come back next week for class 3. All right.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.